Welcome to EPG Pathshala on the course of History and Ideologies of Social Work. My name is Murli Desai and I am a former professor of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Today's topic is Western Ideologies in the Modern Period, the third part. We have so far seen the modern ideologies starting with rationalism, liberalism, democracy, leading to industrialization with capitalism. Then we also saw the ideologies of nationalism and social Darwinism leading to colonization. I'm sorry about that. Today we'll see the ideologies of socialism, communism and welfare, which are kind of different, kind of trying to look at, critically look at what the other ideologies had done and bring about certain different kind of changes. Let us first take socialism. What is the historical context of this ideology of socialism? It emerged in the 19th century Europe in reaction to the development of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. It was a dream conjured up by those oppressed by the violence and exploitation of the capitalist society in their workday lives or by those outraged at their observations of misery and injustice around them. They lambasted the international expansion of capitalist social relations as a process which brought about misery rather than improvements in living conditions of the vast majority of the world's people. Now, what was this new ideology trying to say with reference to the miseries brought about by liberalism? The minimalist definition of socialism would comprise the following characteristics. First, commitment to the creation of an egalitarian society. Two, a belief in the possibility of constructing an alternative egalitarian system based on the values of solidarity and cooperation. And three, the possibility to make significant changes in the world through conscious human agency. Other core aspects of socialism. It sees group as the basic social unit, not individuals. It has a passion for equality, not freedom, and not equality of opportunity. It has a passion also to the removal of hierarchical distinctions and the redistribution of goods on the basis of human needs and not human merits. It singles out work as a fundamental constitutive feature of human nature. You'll see a whole lot of assessment of the problems as well as response is based on work. Socialism is characterized by a belief in justice and equality of outcome, as they believe that capitalism has fostered human inequality by an unequal structure. As we saw earlier, liberalism did not worry about the outcome. They only insisted on equality of opportunities to start with. Formal equality in its legal and political sense is inadequate according to socialism, as it disregards the structural inequalities of the capitalist system. Socialism believes in relative social equality achieved through the redistribution of wealth, through the welfare state, and a system of progressive taxation. One name that all of us have heard about with reference to socialism is that of Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx, to start with, appreciated capitalism and liberalism. In what way? According to him, there was dynamic creativity in capitalism, and this was with reference to the incentives it provided to each individual capitalist to produce more for less. However, in his view, where the liberal theories had gone wrong was in taking as natural and unhistorical the assumption that human beings were egotistical seekers after satisfaction. According to Marx, there were two antagonistic classes in a capitalistic system, the bourgeois and the proletariat. The state has primarily been an instrument to serve the interest of the bourgeois, which were the upper class in each social system. Capitalism required the sacrifice of human beings which generally were the proletariats, to the cause of the accumulation of capital. Low wages and long hours of work meant higher profit for the capitalist, so was justified. As a capitalist system develops over time, capital is concentrated and centralized in fewer and fewer hands, and the supply of wage laborer is increased. We have seen over history, period of time, how the percentage of people who own the maximum wealth is becoming smaller. So fewer and fewer people are becoming more and more wealthy. When the demand of wage laborers is reduced, unemployment increases, which increases the welfare burden on the society. So this is another critique of the socialists of Karl Marx. Marx suggested that the division of labor within the industrial capitalism alienates the worker, something which also Mahatma Gandhi emphasized. This alienation works in 4 ways. The worker lacks control over the disposal of his products. The work does not offer intrinsic satisfaction, thereby destroying the human creativity of the labor. The worker is cut off from having a social relationship with his fellows because his interaction is mainly with the machine with which he works. And the alienated labor reduces human activity to a mechanical adaptation too, rather than an active mastery of nature. When you understand this much more when you compare this to a person who works in a cottage industry, say on a loom, on a hand loom, you'll see that all these aspects are missing because the person is attached to the work and there is no alienation from that work. Marx believed in absolute social equality, brought about by 2 main factors. One is abolition of private property and 2, collectivization of productive wealth. For the following reasons. He believed that wealth is produced by the collective effort of human labor and should therefore be owned collectively and not by individuals. He saw private property as the main factor that encourages people to be materialistic. It is property that is divisive and creates conflict in society, according to him. Marx and Engels, his colleague, proposed a revolutionary socialism in which the working class seizes political power, expropriates private capital, and democratically controls a planned economy designed to utilize the productive forces developed by capitalism to the benefit of all members of society. Marx believed that as capitalism enters its advanced stage and enters the international scene, workers across the world will be forced to unite and overthrow capitalism and replace it with socialism. He predicted that private property would be abolished, the forces of production would be nationalized in the hands of the state, and rights of inheritance would be eliminated, and so on. We'll see how these happen or didn't happen in the communist countries. The implications of socialism are as follows. Karl Marx, who's the best known socialist, when he died in 1883, the ideas of socialism seem to have been defeated. However, by the turn of the century, an international Marxist socialist movement emerged. His thoughts had spread wide internationally, and more people were catching on to the ideology. In the first half of the 19th century, the workers started creating trade or labor unions and national and international federations of the unions, through which they struggled against the capitalist system. Their political ideal was the abolition of private property in land and machinery and its replacement by communal ownership and control of all the factors of production and distribution. The 20th century witnessed the spread of socialist ideas into African, Asian and Latin American countries, which often developed more out of the anti-colonial struggle rather than a class struggle. Now, what is communism? A word similar to socialism used sometimes interchangeably, but is it the same thing? What is the historical context? We hear the word communism in two contexts. One is when Karl Marx spoke about communism, he spoke about the advanced stage of socialism. And communism is also generally used with reference to the communist countries that historically were in place, and many are still in place. Now, Russia was the first country to go through a socialist revolution that took place in the wake of the First World War. The Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, together with three other Soviet republics, formed the Soviet Union in 1922. The classical Marxism vision of socialism as a planned economy arising out of advanced industrial capitalism offered little or no help to Soviet Union because they were still in a pre-industrial economy. So the whole process, ideas of Marx were not very relevant in Soviet Union at that point of time. Lenin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, responded by putting a ban on all internal factions. He brought about Lenin brand of communism basically, and he did several things which were never talked about by the socialists, whether it's Karl Marx or Engels or anyone, but whatever Lenin found to be important, he did, which was also taking over a whole lot of control of the huge Soviet Union, which was later on joined by several other adjacent countries. He put a ban on all internal factions and introduced a new economic policy which promoted mixed economy through what we call state capitalism. Basically, they agreed with the whole liberal capitalist ideology of industrialization. But except the only difference was, instead of the capitalist owning or regulating the market, it was a state which was playing this role in communist countries. The Russian model of communism was imposed on Eastern Europe after 1945, adopted in China after the Chinese Revolution of 49, and spread to North Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Now, what happens in communist rules? As I just said a while ago, the paradigm of development in socialist countries or communist countries are largely the same as that of the capitalistic world. Production and consumption of goods and services are accepted as measures of development. The decision regarding production, use and distribution, however, is not in the arena of market forces but under those of the state. What are the implications of communist rule in these countries? The socialist countries secured a number of major achievements such as follows: industrialization, where there was none; advancement of science and technology; full employment, price stability; women's labor force participation, which took a long time to come about in other countries; expanded childcare facilities because they wanted women to work; improved educational, health and welfare systems; and strengthened military power, etc. However, after achieving decrease in inequalities in income in the first stage, the second stage of the experiment of communism was marked by the emergence of new privileges and crystallization of new inequalities. The intellectuals or the bureaucratic elite emerged under state socialism to take the place of the old capitalist class. They did not formally own the means of production, but they controlled the production of goods and the allocation of valued resources. Detailed studies of these countries show how these bureaucratic elites send their children to study in capitalistic countries, and they would go there for their vacation and so on. It's only the people, the lay people in these countries that were bound by communism. And all the profits, benefits were being enjoyed by these elites, creating new inequalities. Throughout the 4 decades since World War II, contests between capitalism in the First World and socialism in the Second World also known as the Cold War, raged in the Third World until the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1989. We'll go into details of this later. Let us move on to the ideology of welfare and what all was brought about, for what reasons, and what were the implications. The historical context of welfare, again, let's go back to the breakdown of the feudal system. Like we have been seeing that who were the poor, who were the people who needed social work help. We looked at the slaves, we looked at the serfs, we looked at the laborers, we looked at basically all those who were marginalized and made poor in the unequal societal structure. Now, for the context of the modern period, welfare to come about, again, breakdown of the feudal system was important. Remember, serfs on the feudal lands were tied to the land. They were kind of taken care of by the landlords. Landlords were not only using the serfs as laborers for their land, they were also providing protection to them. Now these serfs were roaming around after the breakdown of the feudal system. Again, a new poverty group emerged which didn't know where to go, which didn't know how to survive. And these became again the target group for the newer laws and policies. England was leading in this direction among the Protestant countries in formulating laws to deal with the poor. Now, during the 1600s, when science had begun to replace religion as a source of ultimate authority, scientists criticized that direct and religious charity was indiscriminate and not scientific. Now, so far, charity was always done by the religious groups. No matter which religion, there was always a concept of charity, and there were charitable institutions. But the rationalists said that this was unscientific. You can't just focus on who wants to give. You should also focus on who you're giving and why you're giving, and whether that person deserves what you're giving or not. So, they recommended that charity should be regulated, made scientific. In response to this critique, England enacted the Elizabethan Poor Law in 1601. Now, what is this law all about, and why are we talking about it? A law of 1601 in 21st century. This law was the first law and still referred to as the most significant landmark law with reference to a state's perception of poor and the state's response to poor, and lot of the patronizing moralistic approach still continues in the welfare systems in many countries. Now let's see what this law did. This law provided for helpless people whose needs were large and likely to be prolonged, orphans, the handicapped, chronically ill, and the feeble-aged. It emphasized the difference between the worthy poor and the unworthy poor who were able-bodied. Both were considered responsible for their poverty. They were perceived as source of political trouble, failures of the system, and those who only procreate but cannot maintain their children. Drawing from the Protestant work ethics, those who did not work were accused of sinfulness or immorality. They sharpened the distinction between the deserving and the undeserving poor. It defined the duty of the parish to relieve the poor, establish overseers to perform it, and give them power to raise funds and administer relief. And this was done only after the informal help of family, neighbors, and friends was not available or sufficient. Now, what were the services provided to them? The able-bodied were forced to work in the workhouses, and the impotent poor were placed in the almshouses. The residents in both the houses were given minimum care and had to work for long hours as virtual slaves. The conditions in both were made very unattractive in order to discourage the poor from seeking help. Thus, How did welfare begin? The initial motivation of welfare was far from being designed to provide a modicum of social security. It was conceived as a police measure. By preventing the despair of starvation among the roving bands of beggars, it was expected to diminish the potential danger of desperate action and the ensuing disturbance to society. It was just an eyesore that they wanted to remove and put them in those almshouses or workhouses. Although many changes have been made in this law, as thinking about society and welfare have evolved, this remains to this day the basis for much government social welfare policy throughout the Western world. The earlier paradigm of social work also looked at people who were poor as those who were lazy and needed to provide them with more kind of an approach that would discourage them from becoming poor. So let's see how this whole paradigm thinking has changed over a period of time. Okay, now from this state-based regulated charity, there was a shift to organized, again going back to voluntary charity. From voluntary it came to state-sponsored, but the liberalists criticized the state-sponsored charity. Again, another person, Malthus, is important here, and his work on the essay on the principle of population, where he says that population tends to increase more rapidly than the food supplies. And he said, therefore, that the poor had no moral right to relief, as they diminished the share of the more industrious and more worthy. And according to him, charity increases population without increasing food. So, discourage charity. Charity makes people lazy and dependent and only increases population, whereas poverty followed by death was a natural means for population control. Thus, this liberal ideology brought a shift from state-sponsored welfare to organized voluntary charity. The New Poor Law of 1834 in England was enacted, where public assistance was not considered a right and government was not responsible for employment. And yet we know that there are welfare states in most of the European countries. And how did that come about? It was the Great Depression of the 1930s in the US, which disproved the belief that poverty was always a result of personal laziness and unworthiness, as millions of hardworking, responsible, and previously economically stable workers found themselves without work due to the depression. As a response to this situation, massive changes are brought about in social welfare programs throughout the world, mostly in the form of increased government responsibilities, as individuals or private agencies were unable to deal with the problems of this mass scale. Government and activities began to overshadow the work of all voluntary and public organizations because only the government had the resources and the structure to attack the widespread problems. The liberalists urged the governments to allow free trade and provide social benefits of heavy users. The main core aspect of free market had to be maintained no matter what. Then what do you do with all the losers? So welfare was found to be most convenient, that you can continue to have your free trade based on free market for the capitalists and provide social benefits to the losers in form of unemployment insurance, old age pension and so on, to prevent them from revolting. This is a major criticism of welfare, that it is only a balm. It prevents, it discourages revolutions from taking place, because those who are marginalized are prevented from revolting by being given welfare. This welfare and the welfare state have been socially constructed in the Western paradigm as a capitalist democratic project, therefore also known as welfare capitalism. A capitalist economy and a Western parliamentary democracy are the core requirements of this construction. After the Second World War in 1942, Lord Beveridge published the report of the Interdepartmental Committee of Social Insurance and Allied Services, which is generally known as the Beveridge Report in England. This report provided most significant aspects of how a welfare state can function, and it is the most influential document on the welfare state. It identified 5 giant evils in society: squalor, ignorance, want, idleness, and disease, and went on to propose widespread reform to the system of welfare in the UK. It advocated family allowances, free health services, and full employment, and that all social insurance benefits should be at flat rate and at subsistence level with the aim of abolishing poverty. This report has had a major influence in other countries by setting a much more ambitious agenda for social security than had generally been accepted before. Now, to summarize today's discussion on the ideologies of socialism, communism, and welfare, we saw that socialism emerged in reaction to the development of capitalism and the exploitative industrialization in the Western world. How it visualized a society full of justice, equality, solidarity, and cooperation. Marx's socialist vision basically promoted abolition of private property and collectivization of productive wealth. And the ideology of communism as the higher stage of socialism was discussed together with the communist rule in some countries of the world where capitalism existed but that it was state-sponsored. Lastly, we discussed the ideology of welfare and its movement from voluntary charity to state-sponsored charity to organized charity, and finally to welfare states. Thank you very much. I hope you take each of these modules, you enjoy reading, to enjoy also linking each one of them to the contemporary scenario. Thank you.